We've been taught to respond fast, to fire back, to speak up, to defend, to prove. But here's the truth. You don't win by reacting. You win by staying in control. Let them judge. Let the situation twist and turn. You don't flinch. You don't fold. Because control isn't about controlling others. It's about mastering yourself. The loudest person in the room isn't in control. The calmest is. Emotions arrive without asking for permission. They rise quickly, triggered by moments that catch off guard. A glance, a phrase, a delay, a disappointment. Each has the power to spark something deep, immediate, and intense. Most people treat these emotional signals like commands. A surge of anger becomes a reason to argue. A wave of fear becomes a reason to flee. A sting of embarrassment becomes a reason to shrink. But feelings aren't facts. They're indicators, clues, suggestions that something inside is noticing something outside. That's all. Treating emotion like a destination instead of a road sign leads to chaos. If every inner jolt demanded an outward act, our lives would be storms. But storms aren't sustainable. They destroy. They don't build. Understanding this difference transforms reaction into awareness. You begin to notice when something is trying to take hold of your judgment. That moment, when you feel yourself pulled, is where choice lies. Not in denial, not in suppression, but in observation, in curiosity, in asking what the sensation means without obeying it. Someone cutting you off in traffic doesn't mean your day's been ruined. That drop in your stomach after reading a sharp email doesn't mean you must retaliate. Those butterflies before speaking in public don't mean you should sit down. These inner flares, these sudden signals, are your body's language. And like any language, it must be translated before it's understood. If you act before you interpret, you're handing over control to something blind. And when blindness leads, regret follows. A powerful skill is being able to witness your feelings without being owned by them. It takes patience to stay still when every cell wants to charge forward. It takes strength to listen inwardly while holding your ground outwardly. That tension between reaction and response is where mastery begins. Emotional literacy isn't about controlling feelings. It's about reading them accurately. You don't dismiss anger. You explore its roots. You don't ignore sadness. You trace its origin. You don't reject joy. You let it deepen. Everything has a cause. The better you understand the source, the better you can decide the course. Letting every emotion steer the wheel means you're forever tossed around by things outside your control. Traffic, tone, timing, people's words, people's moods, your expectations, your assumptions, all constantly shifting. But when you decide that emotion is a compass, not a commander, something shifts. You start noticing what moments are showing you. Maybe frustration reveals a boundary that's been crossed. Maybe anxiety signals a need for preparation. Maybe envy points to something you value but haven't admitted. These aren't commands to act. They're invitations to reflect. The more you practice this lens, the more stable your life becomes. You stop lashing out because someone disagreed. You stop spiraling because a plan changed. You stop retreating because something felt hard. You start pausing before speaking. You start breathing before answering. You start thinking before doing. That pause isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's where you regain footing. It's where you reclaim the moment. And most importantly, it's where you separate stimulus from story. So many people don't realize that what they feel isn't just about what's happening. It's about what they've told themselves about what's happening. You miss a deadline and feel shame, not because of the deadline, but because of what you believe it means about you. You're not invited to an event and feel hurt. not just because you weren't there, but because of the narrative you've assigned to that absence. Emotions ride stories, change the narrative, and the feeling shifts. That's power. That's freedom. Not because you force a fake version of things, but because you learn how much of your reality is constructed by interpretation. Training yourself to observe without judgment builds clarity. You don't rush into action. You don't justify behavior just because it was fueled by passion. You become a witness to yourself. That inner witness is calm, curious, grounded. It sees the rise and fall of moods without attaching to them. It asks better questions. Why now? What's this pointing to? What need is beneath this? When you begin operating from those deeper layers, your reactions turn into choices. And choice is everything. Choice means you can feel anger without yelling. You can feel nervous without backing down. You can feel criticized without collapsing. You can stay steady, even when things are messy, even when people are harsh, even when timing is bad, even when expectations fail. You stay steady because you've trained your mind to treat emotion like weather, real, present, sometimes powerful, but never permanent. And definitely not always a signal to run. Sometimes the most powerful act you can take is no act at all, to notice the pulse rising, to notice the heat building, to notice the tug of words wanting to escape your lips, and then to let all of it sit. Not forever, just long enough to learn, long enough to understand, long enough to decide who you want to be in that moment. That space between emotion and reaction is your space to lead your life. People often think control is about denying their inner world, but it's not. It's about knowing their inner world, not in theory, not in hindsight, but in real time. That level of self-awareness requires humility. You stop thinking you know everything about yourself. You start realizing that parts of you are constantly trying to protect, signal, alert, guide, and each part has a voice. Fear says one thing. Pride says another. Insecurity speaks loud. Gratitude whispers. Your job is to listen without letting any single voice become the whole chair. And in listening, you gain insight. You start to understand why certain situations always trigger you. Why some conversations leave you drained. Why some people light up your defenses. Why silence feels loud. Why chaos sometimes feels safer than calm. All of that is information. All of it tells you something. If you can gather that insight and hold it gently, without judgment, you begin to change. Not by force, but by clarity. Clarity brings peace. Not because life is easier, but because your relationship with it is healthier. You don't need every emotion to go away. You don't need to be fine all the time. The assumptions. You just need to understand that every feeling has something to say, but not every feeling deserves to drive your next move. The moment you stop treating every emotion like a call to arms is the moment you begin leading your own experience, not just surviving it. You begin choosing what matters, what gets energy, what gets silence, what gets words, what gets a response. You no longer become the echo of your environment. You become the anchor in the storm. Because you've learned something most people never. Dog emotions speak, but you decide whether to listen or whether to move. And when you make that choice again and again, you stop being led by the noise and start building a life directed by intention. Every instance presents a doorway. That brief window between provocation and decision often hides a quiet strength most overlook. It isn't always the loudest reply or swiftest comeback that holds weight. In many situations, it's what's not said that shapes outcomes. That restraint, that pause, that moment where everything in you wants to fire off, but instead you hold back. There's unmatched power in that discipline. Noise often disguises insecurity. Quick answers mask discomfort. Emotional outbursts frequently point to underlying uncertainty. But calm, Calm reflects someone who sees the full board before making a single move. Calm requires discipline. Calm controls tempo. In a world obsessed with constant input, withholding becomes rare, yet that rarity is exactly what makes it effective. Stillness isn't passive. It's intentional, a deliberate act that communicates maturity. When faced with bait, refusing to bite reveals strength. Most people rush to defend, explain, justify. They're trapped before they realize it. Because as soon as they engage, they've surrendered authority. Staying quiet isn't the same as being absent. It's presence in its purest form, a full awareness of surroundings, motivations, patterns, all examined without urgency. That examination gives rise to insight. It grants perspective unavailable to those stuck in the cycle of immediate gratification. And insight, that's influence. Because with it, you stop reacting to what's immediate and start shaping what's long-term. Consider the difference between reacting and positioning. One is impulsive, the other is strategic. One satisfies a moment, the other prepares for an outcome. Through careful observation, opportunities emerge. You notice contradictions. You see where patience can outlast provocation. You realize not every fire needs your fuel. Silence becomes a mirror. When people push and receive no pushback, they start seeing themselves, their tone, their intention, their need for control. It becomes visible when it's no longer met with distraction. That reflection creates discomfort, but it also introduces accountability. Without reaction, the spotlight remains where it belongs. What's often mistaken for passivity is actually a higher form of influence. Refusing to be pulled into unnecessary conflict communicates more than arguing ever could. It signals a boundary, one that says, I'm aware, but I'm not available for chaos. And when chaos doesn't get fed, it fades. Every conversation offers a fork in the road. One route leads to escalation, the other to elevation. Escalation is easy. Instant gratification, raised voices, sharp tone. Elevation, that's harder. Requires choosing the harder response. None. Requires recognizing that not all questions deserve answers. Not all provocation warrants participation. And most importantly, not every moment needs your energy. Let others fill space with sound. Let them wonder why you're unmoved. In that wondering, they'll learn more than if you explained. When you carry stillness into storms, you shift dynamics. You no longer match frequency, you set it. This kind of restraint doesn't happen naturally. It's built through repetition, through choosing quiet even when emotion screams, through practicing pause even when urgency presses, through realizing that being in control doesn't always look impressive. It feels unshakable. And once you've felt that steadiness, chaos starts looking less tempting. When pressure rises and expectations build, staying composed isn't just admirable. It's transformative. Because while everyone else scrambles to prove a point, you're anchoring presence. And presence, when rooted in self-control, changes conversations. It diffuses tension. It reorients direction. People listen differently to someone who doesn't fight for attention. People lean in when they sense certainty beneath composure. No need to raise volume. No need to fill every gap. Let silence speak. Let the absence of reaction tell your story. That story often lands louder than any explanation. In everyday interaction, those who harness restraint carry immense influence. They don't manipulate, they moderate, they don't withdraw, they watch. And from that vantage point, they lead without demanding, guide without shouting, win without battling. Because that's what real command looks like, not forcing an outcome, but letting others reveal theirs while you remain grounded, not controlling with volume, but directing through presence. Not overwhelming, but outlasting. By choosing stillness in moments others lose themselves, you become the standard. You remind people that dignity isn't reactive. It's consistent. Even under pressure, even when misunderstood, even when provoked. Staying silent in the face of noise takes more strength than shouting ever will. Because silence means you've chosen the bigger fight, the one against your own need to be seen, heard, validated in every moment. You've chosen to trust that impact doesn't always come through response. Sometimes it comes through refusal. Refusing to justify. Refusing to compete. Refusing to be drawn into drama under the disguise of dialogue. That refusal isn't arrogance, it's clarity. It's knowing what you represent, what you prioritize, and what's beneath you. Every time you exercise that clarity, it grows stronger. Like a muscle, discipline builds with use. The more you practice staying quiet, the more you realize how little actually needs your reaction. Most situations resolve, shift, or fade on their own. The only thing they often need from you is space, not participation. Holding that space allows truth to emerge. It lets the other person experience the weight of their own actions, their own tone, their own impact, without your interference to distract or dilute it. That's where change starts. Your silence becomes a standard. It creates conditions where others must rise or retreat. Both outcomes serve you. Both outcomes protect your peace, because your peace isn't up for negotiation. It's maintained through decisions like these. Decisions to observe before acting, to breathe before speaking, to disengage when nothing meaningful can be gained by staying in it. Those choices, small and invisible to many, shape entire relationships. They shape reputations. They shape legacies. Because people remember how you made them feel. And few things leave a mark like someone who kept composure when others crumbled, like someone who declined to engage when everything invited chaos. That kind of behavior doesn't just impress, it teaches. It teaches people that patience can hold space, that composure can redirect momentum, that quiet can command. And through that teaching, you influence more than any outburst ever could. You leave behind something lasting. And in that lasting impression, you demonstrate that silence isn't the absence of contribution. It's a masterstroke, a well-placed pause, a powerful answer to noise. A reminder that stillness doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you've already said everything you needed. By saying nothing at all. When you train your instincts to pause instead of pounce, something fundamental shifts. You unlock the kind of control most only pretend to have. The temptation to lash out, argue, or retreat fades, not because it vanishes, but because it no longer rules. Instead of obeying every impulse, you examine it. You begin filtering. You choose your moments. And that choice becomes your advantage. Calm isn't absence of emotion. It's the decision to steer your experience, even when everything inside wants to surrender to intensity. It's not about suppressing discomfort. It's about navigating it skillfully. The fire doesn't burn you anymore. You walk through it with focus. You take the heat and turn it into clarity. Instead of being pulled under, you rise above. Not because the chaos disappeared, but because you moved through it with intention. Those who react quickly rarely understand the full picture. Quick responses are often incomplete ones. They're built on fragments, one word, one glance, one feeling. But when you respond rather than react, you invite depth. You give yourself the gift of time, not minutes necessarily, but mental space. That space makes all the difference. It creates a window for purpose. It gives room for precision. You stop speaking to defend and start speaking to shape. You stop replying to protect and start responding to lead. Control becomes internalized. It no longer hinges on external approval or control of others. You hold it regardless of setting or situation. Your energy stops rising and falling based on who enters the room. You become consistent. And consistency builds trust, not only with others, but with yourself. You start trusting your ability to remain steady. You believe in your capacity to withstand pressure without losing presence. The moment something jarring happens, your first instinct isn't panic, it's process. You gather context, you scan intention, you prioritize outcome, you focus on meaning over reaction. That internal sequence becomes your superpower. You realize that high-pressure environments aren't the enemy, disorganization is. Unprocessed internal storms are. But when you've created structure within, no turbulence outside can shake it. You've built an inner architecture strong enough to carry weight without collapse. You don't need every situation to be calm. You need you to be. This calmness isn't passivity. It's controlled strength. It's the kind of presence that says, I'm here, I'm aware, I'm deciding. And when others feel that steadiness, they respond differently. People soften. Tension lessens. Conflict slows. Because your tone, your posture, your choice of words all communicate alignment, not just in what you say, but in how you say it. Most seek influence by dominating, by pushing harder, louder, sharper. But influence thrives in subtlety, in the measured pace of someone who isn't threatened by the moment, in the person who refuses to be baited, cornered, or dragged off track. That refusal isn't dismissive, it's directional. It keeps conversations moving forward. It protects purpose. It honors what actually matters. And what matters is rarely found in the first feeling, the first interpretation, the first assumption. Those are shortcuts the mind offers in high-stress instances. But when you slow them down, when you allow for observation, you spot what others miss. Patterns, cues, signals. You see what's beneath the surface, and seeing it allows you to speak directly to it. Your responses become sharper, not in tone, but in clarity. They carry less noise, more intention. They land not because they're loud, but because they're aligned. Aligned with who you are, aligned with what's useful, aligned with what drives real progress. You stop needing to react to every challenge. You stop chasing every correction. You stop proving things that don't need proving. That freedom gives you space to choose what deserves your energy. And in that space you flourish. Because now, your decisions aren't reflexive. They're reflective. They come from understanding, not urgency. From awareness, not anxiety. From groundedness, not grasping. And that makes you unshakable. When someone attempts to rattle you, your stillness frustrates them. They expect an outburst. You give none. They expect defensiveness. You offer focus. They expect escalation. You deliver calm. That calm disarms, it redirects, it teaches. Others begin to mirror your approach, not because you told them how to behave, but because you modeled something better. You become a reset point. A reminder that control doesn't scream. It doesn't scramble. It doesn't chase. It simply remains. You don't need constant reassurance when you're self-aligned. You don't fear misinterpretation when your actions speak clearly. You don't lose direction when others lose theirs, because you've established yours internally, intentionally, unapologetically. Even in disagreement, your tone invites dialogue. Even in pressure, your posture holds presence. Even in discomfort, your decisions stay deliberate. You're no longer reacting to moments. You're responding to meaning. And meaning takes time. It takes discernment. It takes practice. You build it through repetition, through learning from the times you did react, through forgiving yourself for the moments you lost your grip, through returning again and again to the version of you who responds rather than reacts. That version isn't perfect. They don't always get it right, but they're always growing, always learning, always refining the ability to choose presence over panic, intention over impulse, direction over distraction. Eventually, that practice becomes identity. It's no longer something you do, it's who you are. You carry calm not as a mask, but as a mindset. You don't fake control, you have it. Not because nothing touches you, but because you know how to return to yourself quickly. Return to your values. Return to your center. Return to your clarity. You use your breath, your awareness, your boundaries, not to build walls, but to create space. Space for real solutions. Space for truth. Space for movement. That space is sacred. It's where progress happens. It's where conversations evolve. It's where change begins. Not through force, but through presence. Not through dominance, but through clarity. You navigate challenges without absorbing them. You engage fully without losing yourself. You stay open, but never empty. That balance is rare. That balance is power, because real power isn't in the reaction. It's in the response. Nothing outside remains fixed. Environments fluctuate. Expectations shift. Timing falters. Results vary. Circumstances defy plans. No blueprint survives unaltered. Yet within that instability lives your certainty. Your steady commitment to manage the only element always within reach, your behavior. That steadiness isn't about rigidity, it's presence, consistency, a quiet resolve to remain accountable regardless of what unfolds. External factors may interrupt preferences, but they hold no authority over attitude, intention, or integrity. Releasing the urge to dictate everything around frees you to elevate everything within. Let go of the pressure to shape every moment. Events unfold how they must. Delays happen. People change. Commitments break. Outcomes arrive unexpectedly. Still, your actions remain yours. Your attitude, your word, your character. Entirely yours. Holding tightly to control leads to tension. Anxiety multiplies when anchored to fixed expectations. Release creates resilience. Flexibility fosters peace. When you acknowledge the difference between influence and domination, your choices sharpen. You realize strength lies not in orchestrating everything, but in navigating anything. Acceptance is not defeat. It's ownership. A grounded understanding that while you can't dictate the wind, you absolutely command your sail, your mindset, your tone, your response. Those remain untouched by circumstance. Inner stability builds confidence. When you operate from a place untethered to validation or perfection, you make decisions differently. You speak with purpose, not performance. You act from conviction, not convenience. You trust your process, not the applause. Clarity follows detachment. The less obsessed you are with results, the more intentional your efforts become. Obsession with results births panic. Panic leads to haste. Haste breaks processed. Discipline resists that spiral. It keeps you centered, focused, grounded. You shift from chasing to choosing, from grasping to giving, from proving to practicing, because at the core, mastery doesn't stem from controlling everything. It comes from refining how you show up again and again, despite whatever else is happening. This type of alignment isn't taught. It's chosen. Every time stress presents itself, every time goals slip through, every time timelines shatter, you decide whether those moments shape your standard or reveal it. And when your standard is built around accountability, your influence expands, even when outcomes don't. Because trust grows in reliability, in showing up with grace, even when plans collapse, in leading with respect, even when you're let down, in finishing strong, even when beginnings weren't ideal. That follow-through defines who you are more than any win ever could. Leadership begins with ownership. You don't need titles. You don't need recognition. You only need presence. Owning your input regardless of feedback, showing character regardless of attention, and honoring values regardless of reception, that's real power. You stop negotiating your consistency based on reward. You don't scale effort depending on who's watching. You don't compromise your tone based on your mood. You choose actions aligned with your vision, not your frustration. Even when no one claps, you build. Even when results delay, you invest. Even when it's uncomfortable, you grow. That quiet consistency builds legacy. It builds resilience. It builds identity, because when storms come, those rooted deeply don't uproot. They adapt. You trust the seed, not the season. Not everything blooms on your timeline, but growth isn't measured by immediate bloom. It's measured by invisible effort, integrity in practice, purpose in motion, commitment without condition. There's liberty in focusing solely on contribution. No need to predict reception. No need to chase reactions. Just do the work. Stay focused. Build habits, not expectations. Drive systems, not fantasies. And let progress take form as it must. Frustration loses power when you stop attaching worth to outcomes. Disappointment weakens when your identity isn't tangled in reaction. You begin to act not for applause or assurance, but for alignment. Aligned individuals don't drift. They stay centered through setbacks. They adjust without collapse. They breathe through pressure. They don't need everything to go right to stay right. Their core remains intact. Detachment strengthens perception. With no obsession clouding judgment, vision sharpens. You start seeing opportunities you once missed, hearing cues previously ignored, adjusting without panic, learning without fear. You no longer rely on outcomes to validate direction. Purpose gives momentum. Discipline maintains pace. Integrity governs course. Those internal forces never waver, even when everything else does. Perseverance isn't just survival. It's conscious effort without assurance. Pushing forward despite no immediate return. Believing that consistency writes the story, results only finish. The longer you stay committed to process over payoff, the more unshakable you become. Results come. Results go. But how you move through the process defines the person you become. There's dignity in showing up without needing everything to go your way. Pride in refusing to bend your character just because the setting shifted. Joy in knowing you never handed away control of your response, even when it hurt. You reclaim energy. You stop trying to manipulate everything around. You stop burning out over things you couldn't change. Instead, you double down on what you can, guiding effort, attitude, alignment. From that posture, peace grows. Not because life gets easier, but because you stop fighting battles that weren't yours. You stop wrestling with what refuses to be managed. You simply walk with wisdom. Not every question deserves your panic. Not every loss defines your journey. Not every plan gone sideways signals failure. Some things simply weren't meant to fit. But that doesn't mean you won't. Because the measure of success isn't just what you achieve. It's who you are when things don't go as planned. And when your essence remains solid through storms, you become unstoppable. You stop fearing uncertainty. You stop avoiding difficulty. You stop breaking down over surprise. Instead, you adapt, you reframe, you evolve. Control becomes less about grasping and more about releasing. Releasing urgency, releasing judgment, releasing the illusion that everything depends on precision. That release makes space. Space for grace. Space for growth. Space for unforced rhythm. Where effort matters, not perfection. Where presence means more than outcome. Where consistency outweighs speed. You walk lighter. You move smarter. You lead stronger. Because, deeply that while you'll never steer every result, you'll always navigate how you respond. And that, more than anything else, is enough.